Welcome to the Special Board of Commissioners meeting, Monday, March 18th. Would everyone please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so this evening we are here in the process of discussing the Radnor Fire Company funding and such other business as it comes before the board. So I will ask for public participation. Is there any public participation? And we can have it at the end too. We'll probably have back and forth during the discussion. All right, seeing no public participation. There is an addition on the agenda this evening under the heading of other business as it comes before the board. And it is a removal from a board and of a member from one of our boards and commissions. I need a motion to remove Mr. Jack Millerick from the Shade Tree Commission.
So moved. Second. Good luck, Jack.
This is a, is there any discussion with regards to the removal of Mr. Millerick?
Never an easy thing with a dedicated volunteer that serves on our volunteer boards.
Yes. Is there any staff comment to the motion on the floor? Is there any public comment to the motion on the floor? All right, all those in favor of the removal of Mr. Jack Millerick from the Shade Tree Commission, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, fire company funding. Who is going to start this off for us, Mr. White? Or
what we've asked the board is, as part of this series of having discussions, is the contributions towards the fire departments. It's one that it has continued to increase. I think given a lot of what we've heard from the departments, as well as some of the trends within the Commonwealth here, this will be something that funds will not be going backwards. I believe contributions will look to increase. So this gives us an opportunity to, for the board to provide us direction on how we would continue to look at meeting the needs and the requirements of the fire companies on the volunteer basis, and something which my hope would be that there would be a permanent funding mechanism put into place that would allow the departments to skip our annual budget meetings to look for increases, but something that they can plan on too, that they look out 5 and 10 years of where their departments need to go.
Yeah, what we're looking at on the screen is one of the pages in the 2019 budget. We spent some time on this during the budget discussions last fall. This is a summary of the expenses that the township incurs in relation to fire service. So not all the expenses on this table go directly to the fire companies, but they're in one way or another involved in helping them provide the service. So we have the Radnor Fire Company. Going back to 2015, obviously contributions existed prior to then. But to the township manager's point, we can see over the years additional subsidies have been necessary. In 2019, as we discussed during the budget, Radnor Fire Company had actually asked for, I believe it was $250,000. The board ultimately approved $100,000. And I think as part of that approval, it was to continue the discussion into this year about if we were going to close that gap even more. But $100,000 was included in the budget as adopted. In addition, the township pays for workers' comp insurance and vehicle insurance on the Radnor Fire Company employees and vehicles. We also pay for the fuel, and then we pay a flat $200,000 per year that goes towards their capital replacement program. Similarly, Bryn Mawr Fire Company, we have a base operating contribution and then a capital contribution. Again, the capital contributions for each were arrived at a number of years ago. It's actually probably time to revisit those. They were based on capital projections that are getting close to 7 or 8 years old. And it was a long capital outlook and divided by a certain number of years, some sort of replacement schedule. What the township was looking for at the time was a flat fixed amount that we could budget and plan for, because the practice prior to the annual contributions was when either of the companies needed a vehicle, they'd come and ask the township, and it could be $500,000 that the township would contribute at a time. So this just made it a little easier to budget. And then the township does provide a small stipend also to the Broomall Fire Company. And then in addition to the monies that go to the companies, we also provide or pay Aqua for the hydrant water utility. Again, that's not going to any fire company, but it's related to providing the service to the community. So we include it as a line item when we're talking about our fire service in total. And then we do have the volunteer fire relief funds that come from the state. We deposit those and then are required within 30 days to immediately pass that along, and that goes entirely to the Radnor Fire Company. So we have that as a pass-through line at the bottom. So if you're looking at the township's exposure or cost to provide the service, it would be this row here. And again, to the manager's point, it's gone from $525,000 up to $1.1 million in a 5-year span. And all of our discussions over that time suggest that trend is not going to change. So what typically happens is in September, October, November, we're putting a budget together, and usually the fire companies come and they present what they think they might need for the next year. And as we've learned over the last couple of years, that number keeps growing on us, which makes it increasingly difficult administratively to find that in a otherwise flat revenue environment. So it kind of came to a head last year during the budget discussion, so we added it as an item for tonight. The one, I guess, editorial I'll add is from the administration's perspective, when we are trying to prepare a budget that includes all of the services that the township provides, from police to public works to recreation, and our contributions to our community organizations like the library, the senior center, and the like, we end up usually in some sort of tug of war, because this is money that is not something that the township manager has control over. It's a contribution to a completely separate organization, yet at the same time it's competing for the same dollars that the manager is trying to prioritize or put in a budget that satisfies what the board's looking for in terms of service delivery. So all that said, I think what we're looking for is some direction from the board on how you see funding the fire companies going forward. Again, knowing that these amounts are probably going to increase, and I think we might hear that from the fire companies tonight. But at the end of the meeting, or at least in March instead of October, we start the discussion on where we think this is going to go and how you, the board, would like to see this incorporated in a budget.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Sankowski. I don't know, Eamon, do you want to, I don't know,
Hear from them first.
do we want to ask questions? Do we have any questions? And then we can have the fire company come up and speak.
The only question I have is one, should this be limited to fire companies, or should it be emergency services? So that would include police also. And then the second question is, I know you must have something in mind as a way to move forward, and I'd like to know what that is before we.
What I think is one of the things is safety services should be looked at as a whole, even though the fire companies, like Bill had mentioned, are a separate entity from the township under your authority. I do believe you need to look at that, as well as the funding, the continued funding of the police department and meeting their needs, which the board has done a nice job of in the past of funding them. For the fire companies, I think, again, it's a vital, critical service that the township provides through these departments, especially on a volunteer basis. However, the trend and the history and where we're going is that they will continue to need additional funding to be able to provide these services. And we're fortunate that we have 3 very good companies that provide these services. I mean, they do an outstanding job for the community. Long-term funding is something that it's good to happen now in the planning, instead of you're being proactive instead of reactive and having some emergency happen to where all of a sudden there's this, we need to pump a whole lot of money into this without long-term thought. One of the suggestions that I will make is that we look at a permanent fire levy that would be voted on, placed in front of the voters to vote for, that would provide not only for the current coverage, but would also, with their involvement, look at what is their future funding needs and requirements going to be. So it's not where, if it was able to be passed, that within a year you're going back to the voters again. This is something that engages the public, engages the residents as part of this process, and it gives a good opportunity for not only the township, but also for these departments to have an opportunity to be involved and tell that story to the community.
Bob, there was a study done by the state looking at fire companies and the trend. It'd be good if you made that available to all the commissioners if they haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
How's the breakdown determined? I know Radnor Fire Company came and asked us, but how is it determined what Bryn Mawr, and is it just what they asked for?
Yeah, well, I can speak specifically to Radnor and Bryn Mawr, and the answer is yeah. I mean, it was born out of their request at some point in time long ago, and then as you learned last fall, and it changes over time based on what they think they need and request. And I should have said earlier that it's not only, I mean, it's got to be awkward for them too. I'm talking about you guys like you're not sitting right there, but it's got to be awkward for the fire companies to come and ask the board every year. So it would seem more efficient if there was some sort of more permanent and ongoing funding source. So it's not just the administration that's in the tug of war, they're in the middle of it as well, and providing life safety. And the only thing is the Brumo amount, the contribution, that's a number that was in the budget when we arrived. It really hasn't changed much. So I think the communications there, they haven't been as extensive with that company in particular as it has been with the other two. And I'm really not sure why.
Well, they're going to have to pay for their new firehouse, so that could change.
It's a luxury firehouse that should be over there.
Yeah.
I think just to dovetail on what Bill had said, this allows them for the fire companies to do their long-term planning based on a continued revenue stream. So in case there's a shortfall and business privilege tax doesn't come in, then where you're looking at trying to provide those services, then they don't have to worry about, okay, where does our funding fall? Do we get cut or not? Because that's such a vital service that's provided. Something they can count on, something they can plan for.
What's with the fluctuation in fuel costs? It looks like it doubles and then goes back from 7,000 to 15,000.
Gasoline prices.
The price of gas.
Oh yeah, it's just
Double. Well, gas is pretty cheap now.
Did it real low.
No,
at
gas
67
isn't cheap. It's just a lot lower than it has been.
I mean, is it based on consumption? If it's based on, I mean,
It is,
they
yeah,
have
so
more
the-
calls and more
27
miles that they have to drive.
Yeah, the fueling islands require a code to be entered when they fuel the vehicles up, and then the gas expense is allocated based on those codes. They're pretty accurate. We haven't had many issues over the years, so I mean, without doing a pretty deep dive, I'm not sure why the fluctuation in that particular line existed.
Any other commissioner questions?
Well,
Tonight, I think we really need to be talking at the 50,000 foot level. I can see a lot of detail that we'd have to get into with anything final. Like they have a banner year, get a lot of reimbursements, don't need the money. Does that go into a sinking fund or is it returned to the township? And likewise, what kind of control? Because we just can't give the fire companies $1 million and then walk away. We still have a responsibility to the citizens to assure that the money's being spent appropriately. But that's the detail we get into later. Let's hear a blue fire.
What's that?
Let's hear a blue fire.
Okay. You guys? All right.
Just really quickly, while Amy can set up, Commissioner, to your point, yeah, if there was dedicated millage, the township would establish a separate fund to account for those revenues and disbursements. And then the policies of the board would dictate how those are divvied up and what happens with any kind of excess or surplus or deficit for that matter. But in no case would it be commingled with any other dollars of the township. It would be accounted for completely separate, similar to our sanitary sewer and our stormwater revenues.
Good day, everybody. Thank you for your patience. My name is Eamon Brzunis, Administrative Director at Radnor Fire Company. I'm joined tonight by our Fire Chief, Joe McGuire, our President, Jim Kelly, our Deputy Chief, Michael McGuire, Assistant Chief, Ryan McGuire, Treasurer, Max Klinger, Past Chief, Douglas Felsky, and finally, Board Member and Firefighter, Damian Enderle. All the folks that I just mentioned are all volunteers. I'm one of the few full-time employees we have at the fire company. There's a few things I'll respond to that were talked about in the beginning, positive feedback and comments that we can provide. I'm sure the Chief from Burma will comment as well. Just, again, speaking to Commissioner Nagel's point, we took on a high-level approach to this. We don't want to get too far into the nitty-gritty, but go over some general things, talk about how we ended up in 2018 from a budget perspective and where we want to head 2020 to 2021. One thing Commissioner Abel stated, the report he referenced, the state just did, that's the SR6 report. That really encompasses everything fire and EMS throughout the state of Pennsylvania. It's a focus on what is going on with the volunteer fire service. So I printed out the report for everybody, so you all have a copy of it. There's a lot of different things in there. Target recruitment retention, need for paid staff, ambulance billing challenges, galore. It's everything. So you read it, and certainly you contact any of the fire chiefs with any questions. Just going to hit on ongoing variables, 2018 call volume, how we ended up 2018 from a budget perspective. The Chief's office put together a capital apparatus plan to share with you, give you a general idea of where we're heading with apparatus, career staffing vision, and finally what we're doing with volunteer recruitment and retention. One thing we talk about constantly that already came up with the fuel discussion, call volume. We have fluctuations of call volume due to numerous factors. 2018 was one of our busiest years all time for EMS, and fire was right up there as well. That's something we continue to closely monitor. In the subsequent slide, you'll see some of the patterns of what it looked like in 2018. Labor costs. That's really the big driver of a lot of the numbers you see behind Radnor Fire Company. Radnor Fire Company is unique in that, yes, we provide fire and rescue service to a portion of the township. Bryn Mawr does another sizable portion, and the Broomall's got a smaller portion that closes out the service providers. Radnor Fire Company is the sole provider of medical services in the township. That's one distinct difference between the organizations that service the township that causes our need more staff. Third, EMS billing payer mix. Main thing there, we have an aging population. Radnor Township is no different than a lot of other municipalities in the state of Pennsylvania with Medicare age residents. As you age, unfortunately, your likelihood of needing 911 increases pretty dramatically, which means you need an ambulance. The majority of our payer mix is the Medicare age population. Those calls typically are reimbursed at about $429 per response if you are transporting that person to the hospital, and if you aren't fighting with the insurance company, Medicare government basically, or over what was it necessary or was it not necessary to go to the hospital. So your typical cost of an ambulance ride is $600 to $800. So right out of the chute, it's from a financial perspective, you're losing money with those types of calls. So as those continue to escalate, you have a delta there that's problematic. State and federal legislation, again, the SR 6 report touches a lot of things the state can do to help our officials like you to make better decisions and to put things into action. At the federal level, there's some different things that are beneficial to us, some really not so much. From a federal perspective, the federal grants that we can apply for. So we recently were awarded Assistant to Firefighters grant, which saved us almost $90,000 to modernize our vehicle exhaust removal system in the station. So that's a big deal. So that's company funds that we can save, or relief dollars we didn't have to use because we took advantage of that federal grant that came to be when Congressman Walden was in office. And finally, volunteerism. That's a moving target. And it's one of the main reasons we're here tonight. Again, that's one of the main focus of the SR 6 report. That's a challenge for all three fire companies that service the township. Getting volunteers in the door, but getting them to stay, getting them trained, getting them competent to be providers in the community.
Is your call volume, are you just talking Radnor calls?
Yeah, Radnor calls. But I think a lot of what I talk about is it's all encompassing for all the companies. So obviously from a selfish perspective, I'm advocating for Radnor, but the other thing, we have these presentations, important to note that we work closely with our partners. So Bromar backs us up on house fires, we back them up. So we need to ensure the health of both organizations, including Bromar.
These would be calls outside of the township.
It could be. It could be. Yeah. I mean, the majority of our calls are in Radnor Township. We do mutual aid. Bromar's the same way. But the majority of our calls are in our quote-unquote our primary service areas that we protect. And that's not always the case for some fire companies. Some fire companies, the majority of calls they run are mutual aid. That is not the case. So one thing from your perspective is you're putting tax dollars into the equation. It's going back and staying here in the town as far as your services that are being delivered. But mutual aid is a very normal thing that occurs across the Commonwealth, and with staffing the way it is, it's a necessary thing that we have to provide to help each other out, so show major incidents like a house fire. And you see that on Facebook with the different responses and things that we get.
Do you think you're going to see an increase in calls in, say, like the Devon area with all the development going on there?
Well, I mean, two big things which will have a indirect impact on Radnor Fire Company, and it has to a small extent. Recovery Centers of America in Devon, that's protected by Berwyn Fire Company. The second unit, as we refer to it, backup is Radnor Fire Company. So Berwyn's tied up, Radnor's going down there. Brightview Senior Living, which is basically right on the border of Radnor and Tredyffrin Township. Again, that will be another one that will have an indirect impact on Radnor Fire Company. So yeah, it's kind of that Devon area, sure. I mean, you're going to see some of that domino effect, as we call it, when you're getting multiple calls at one time. The one thing, if you spend time in our fires for anything like the period, you can literally, every call that's going on in like the whole entire world. You get every scanner and gadget that's going off in there. And it's not uncommon, many days, you're getting Radnor, Berwyn, Paley, Malvern, all these have one ambulance call at once at multiple points during the day. And a lot of that's tying up those paid guys that we also rely on to go on fire responses, which, again, it compounds on itself as additional calls are coming in.
So, Eamon, can I, first question, do you mind if we interrupt you during the presentation?
I'm good.
Okay.
This is your show. I'm here.
And so secondly, you mentioned that, so the EMS goes on, do they go on every fire call or only when it's determine that they need to go on a fire call?
It depends on the circumstance. Like, for example, we go up on the Blue Route for an auto accident with a trapman, or just an auto accident, somebody injured, they're not trapped necessarily. The fire trucks are going up there, the ambulances are going up there. If there's an accident on Route 30, it could be where it's just, fender bender, and someone has some neck pain, the ambulance may go up. But if there's fluids leaking out of the vehicle, if they hit a telephone pole, fire company's going to respond up to the scene. So it kind of depends on the call type and what's going on.
And our ambulance, so you mentioned, so you guys would go up to Berwyn, the fire company would go to Berwyn and help in Berwyn or TE or something like that, and similarly. Is the ambulance the same way, or do they have their own EMS services, like, in TE and,
Yeah.
I know, Narberth serves a lot of areas,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, so we do that. I mean, Narberth, we provide mutual aid down in Lower Merion. It's not a lot, but we go down to Narberth to assist them in Lower Merion, depending on if they have high call volume, and vice versa. They're coming up to typically the western part of the township to back us up if we're tied up on other calls. Same, if you start working your way east, Trinidad and Easttown, it's a mix of a few different services that serve that community. So typically it's Radnor's going to Narberth or they're going to Berwyn. Those are kind of the two main thoroughfares. Sometimes you go up towards Newtown area, sometimes you head towards Upper Merion, but the main people are Lower Merion and Trinidad Township that we're responding to assist, or Easttown.
Eamon, if I could ask a question. Are you finding yourself going to Upper Merion more since there's development that's taking place up there?
No, I mean, not in particular. We get called over for structure fires for areas that border Trinidad for Radnor in the corner over there, like near the Panhandle. But Chief, I don't.
Unless
I
they
haven't noticed an uptick in
If they
that.
have a working fire somewhere south of 202, then we're on the cards over there.
Yeah.
When there's a second alarm company. But we don't usually go. We've gone north of 202 a couple times on some very large scale incidents. Most times we're right outside.
But that's the same as what someone would come down here.
And someone will come in the same way with us if we have big fires, such as Berwyn. Eamon's Berwyn's fire chief, and he knows it. There are plenty of times when we've had working fires in Radnor. Berwyn's been down here. Bryn Mawr's been up. Upper Marion's been over. Newtown's gone over to us, and everything else. So it's all a mutual aid thing. So it's not just us going out. There are other companies coming in and cover us as well.
I understand it's not mutual aid, but with all the growth in Lower Merion and in Radnor, have your, I don't know if this is the correct term, your maps of where you cover, have that, when was the last time you reevaluated that or changed that? So maybe, I know Bryn Mawr does Garrett Hill, for instance, but maybe because there's now such an explosion in one, well, Radnor or Wayne would handle that as opposed to another company. You kind of review what your domain is every now and again, and how much has that changed because of the growth in population?
It varies. I mean, a lot of those discussions are occurring in fire chief to fire chief, so Chief Kincaid, Chief McGuire. They would have conversations about different response types. We saw, we really haven't seen like a certain area in Radnor where it's been like an oh my God moment, like we have to make some huge adjustment here. But again, it's something at the fire chief's level that they're going to think about that proactively and then try to address it. And ultimately, we come to the township, so if we can staff the manager, have a discussion about that. Does it make sense to make an adjustment to the response area? But that's how that would, that analysis would flow.
The 911 dispatch, is that only for Delaware County or only for Chester County or only for Montgomery County? Or is it multiple?
Each township, each county has their own dispatch center.
Okay.
Ours happens to be in Lima. Chester County's in West
Okay.
Chester.
So, and I don't know, because if this would have any effect, with dollars and money, but because that Radnor or, we're being serviced from 3 different counties. Bryn Mawr is Montgomery, we're Delaware County, and T is Chester County. Has that had any negative effect or cost money because it's not as fluid? You'd have to make a call of who's closer. Does that affect response times as well?
Specifics.
There's different challenges. We could be here for a while explaining all the different nuances with the county dispatch center. Each is different. Chester, Delco, Monaco. We have what we call county transfer delays. So if, you pick up a call in great examples like different. So if someone calls from a landline, that's ringing directly to Westchester, but Radnor's primarily dispatched to Delaware County, so that they're calling Delcom, they're then putting the call out. Sometimes that's quick, sometimes it takes a minute or two. See that's kind of normal. That's same with Monco Chester, Monco to Delco transfers.
We've also taken strides on our dispatch from Chester and Montgomery.
Yeah.
Our paging system comes from Delaware County. But, and again, without going into the science of a lot of it, I could bore you to death. As soon as one of the Radnor units is alerted from the Chester County CAD, which is the computer aided dispatch, our phones are going off. That we're, within a minute or two, are going to this call. And the same with Montgomery County. It's like a cap code. It's capturing the unit, and we're getting alerted. Delaware County might not have the information yet, but our guys know that within a minute or two, your phones, pagers, things like that are going off for this incident. So we've taken a lot of strides in the last couple of years to reduce the overlapping. They're still making phone calls. You know, they're still, hey, is Radnor available for this? You know, where you lose your lag time. They're all eventually going to be able to almost text or email the incident from computer to computer, but it's just not there yet.
Okay, no, I mean, you guys have an excellent response time, and I know that you want to keep that up, and I didn't know if that would have any.
I would
that
say
has any
a couple
negative-
of years ago it might have been a problem. We've taken a lot of strides, and again, that costs money as well,
Sure.
to be able to do that, to reduce the interruption.
Does that answer pretty good? Or?
That's good. Good enough for us.
Last year when we talked, I believe it, had a similar image of what our call line looked like. So really not surprising, during the day, about 7 a.m., our call line starts to go up. So at night, obviously, we're all sleeping. Our life hazard higher at night because we're, again, sleeping at night, and if God forbid fire starts, we're going from dead asleep to awake. Not much travel going on at night, so that's why our volume pretty much really slows down. So it picks up, especially towards the middle of the day, and stays pretty consistent through late afternoon. It starts to tail off late evening. So not really surprising, Radnor, most of our folks that work are not shift workers. A lot of them do not work in Radnor Township or the immediate area, so a lot of their availability is non-existent Monday through Friday, 7 to 3 to 4 time frame, 9 to 5 time frame. That's where we have a lot of our responses, both fire and EMS. So this is the combined volume by hour, and it just highlighted in the middle section from 0700 through 2159 hours during the day.
Do you have a similar plot for false alarms?
I can put one together for you if you
Just curious.
Sure. And it's just breaking out fire and EMS call volume. So, EMS volumes, that's 73% of total volume is EMS, and balance is fire responses. So, again, it matches when you combine all together, and we're seeing that rise around 7 o'clock in the morning. It stays up pretty high, consistent throughout the middle portion of the day. One thing I thought would be helpful to understand how we ended up with our 2018 budget. So we obviously have fire company component and we have the ambulance component. To make this easy, we put everything together in the one pot, because only at the end of the day, that's how we need to look at this as an organization. As Mr. White pointed out, I included the fuel and the workers' comp number and the capital, but obviously isn't necessarily seen in our operating budget. The fuel number and I believe the workers' comp number, each slight extra, were a little less than that. I pulled it off the township budget report, but it's just a little bit different. It's not too far off of that. But it's important to footnote that because that is important support for the fire company costs that we don't need to bear. So just working from just really smallest to biggest here as far as denominations. So start with our merchandise, that's clothing sales, things of that nature, all the way up to ambulance billing as far as revenue. So without surprise, ambulance revenue carries the day on an annual basis, and that is paying for the staff. All that money is going back in to help pay for the staff that are there, that are running the majority of the ambulance calls throughout the year. As I said, we broke out Radnor Township, obviously, with your support, which is significant in the equation. We do cover a portion of Tredyffrin Township. We ship 31,500 from Tredyffrin. And the rest are kind of standard things that we have. One thing on there that is relatively new for 2018, we saw for part of the year with rental. We have a living program established. We have 2 volunteers at the fire company living at a reduced rent next to the firehouse. So the fire company does generate a little bit of revenue off of that, but in exchange for the reduced rent, those 2 volunteers are providing service to the fire company, responding to emergencies. So that's what that is as you're looking at different aspects of our operating budget on the income side. So $1.7 million.
So your fundraising and donations is 293.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I see the we take. I mean, look. We like that number to be higher. So a lot of that is tied up in our direct mail campaign. It's a decent amount of money that we receive from that, from the community to support what we're doing. I mean, you can't. That's a game changer, that number that we receive. We've done a pretty good job of maintaining that through the years. Obviously, you get competition from other nonprofits. When there's major disasters in the country and people are donating, hurricane relief and things of that nature, sometimes you might see ebbs and flows. But be around close to 300, we like to see it higher. That's a pretty good number.
Even is that from both the appeal for the ambulance and the appeal for the fire?
Correct. Yep. And I'm glad you brought that up because it depends on your age demographic. Because we'll get a lot of people that will want to donate to the ambulance that may need it, or there's just more awareness around the ambulance. Sometimes they see that more as you start to age a little bit. You start to think about those things. And the fire, because ambulance we make a little bit more than on the fire side, but.
Do you think it might confuse people though? Like, do they think, well, I already gave? And then
yeah, we do get questions on that. Burma and Paley, for example, and I think Malvern, really, I think most of the companies that I'm aware of in the area do separate appeals. Some actually do a residential fire, residential ambulance, and then do a separate business appeal. Some have cut out the business appeal and they just do one fire and one ambulance, and that's it. That's one way. We haven't thought about that. We could do something like that where we just do one campaign, but again, we get some people that are laser focused on they just want to donate to the ambulance or they just want to donate to the fire company, which is fine. Either way, we're willing to support the fire company both ways or one. I mean, it helps us because obviously it reduces a lot of the discussion of what else we're going to need from the township as far as being able to deliver the services moving forward.
And you get no separate support from, say, Villanova or Eastern or Cabrini or?
President Roderick, this is going back a few years. I know we received, excuse me, we got a little donation for the ladder truck. I can't remember what it was from Eastern, but they gave us, this could be wrong, it was like $5 or $10 grand from Eastern. That was to help, we were trying to get the ladder truck. And we had some discussion with them at helping us support a capital project. I could go back at the exact number.
No.
I know it was at least a few thousand bucks from them.
But there's nothing regular. There's no.
No. I mean, we would certainly welcome support and NHA from the collegiate institutions. We respond EMS-wise to all of them. Villanova, University Falls, and Bryn Mawr's first due for fire protection. But yeah, I mean, their support would be welcome. We're certainly not going to say no.
So if you send them an appeal envelope, they're not writing a check and sticking it back in the mail?
Sometimes we'll get things, sometimes you don't, but it's usually, it's not something where I would go to you and say, hey, guess what? We got 50 grand from Villanova that can help upgrade the firehouse and put in more living facilities. Or we got $500,000, which is going to cover about 90% of what it costs to replace a fire truck. Believe me, I'll tell you when that happens. You'll know.
But if they have a fire, you would go and put it out?
Absolutely.
We've responded to hazmats that are up there that are very expensive to these departments.
On the expense side, again, a lot of these things are self-explanatory. I mean, the one I pointed out, about 63% of our budget, again, is on the staff, is career staff. That's our firefighter EMTs, our firefighter paramedics, and our paramedics. That's our full-time staff, our part-time staff, that's salary, that's benefits. I started in 2008 at Radnor as a full-time employee. We were nowhere near that number at 975. We were down like around $500,000, like four to five, right, Max? Yeah. So that's started to steadily climb over the years. One thing that Radnor, when I started, and I mean they're still holding on with some very dedicated volunteers in the ambulance, but they were able to kind of delay a little bit the need to increase the staff. They had such a dedicated, large volunteer base on the ambulance, and unfortunately, for various reasons, that number is starting to shrink. Which again, that drives up that need for career staff to make sure you have those folks there to respond to the calls. And we're doing basically 2,300 ambulance calls a year. You got to make sure you have people in the building to make sure you're handling these calls. You have a question? Sorry. Yeah, so more than happy to answer it. So I mean, from an operating budget perspective, we were happy. We're about 134K in the black. So looks good. We can do some things with that, but we're limited. When you talk about adding an FTE on, you're looking at about $90,000 to $100,000 is an FTE. So now we're down to $34,000. And depending if we have an expense that we can't use relief funds for, that 34 evaporates fairly quickly. So while we're encouraged that yes, we were in the black for 2018, largely due to support of the township and the community, we just need to be mindful there's some limitations to that, and also some of the discussion we're about to have in a second, you're going to understand the severe limitations we have. That's where we're at right now. Major project updates, as already mentioned, and this is part of 2018, got completed in 2019. Installation of motor vehicle exhaust removal system. Our only liability with that grant being awarded from the federal government was a 10% cost share, which is excellent. So kudos to the chief's office for following through on that. Second item, which 2018 is going to bleed over in 2019, ambulance replacement project. We try to replace ambulances in about a 5-year clip. Sometimes you can stretch those out, but these things start to nickel and dime. You're doing hard driving. You all live here in Radnor. I can tell you the differences from Radnor to where most of my experiences as a fireman in Berwyn are completely different with the road system. The stopping, the going, the hard driving on the Blue Route, these things get beat up pretty good. So trying to turn them over on a 5-year basis is good because you maintain some value. So we'll get roughly about $42,000, which is pretty good on a trade-in for those units. So we're going through that process now. Now it's staggered when we're delivering. So the one should be 2019, and then the one might be 2020, depending on how they come off the production line. So that's a big one to mention to you. The last one.
Does that include fitting out?
No. But as you know, I mean, one thing that we're at least in the position now, a lot of our equipment's been up. We've been maintaining that equipment. Monitors, like the heart monitor, it's about $30,000. The Lucas device, it's about $16,000. So there's other. That's a good point. So we transfer those things over. Obviously, the narcotics that we carry, those expire. A lot of this durable hard equipment we transfer right over. We don't have to spend any money. Final thing that we completed this past year, 20-year-old roof. Thing was leaking like a sieve. That got replaced as $122,000. That was paid out of company capital funds. 2019 through 2020, as we talked about a few times, our 5-year community-driven strategic plan. We're continuing to work on that. There's more coming out about that. Volunteer recruitment and retention. We've mentioned that already. We need more volunteers. We're doing more outreach. Increasing career staff numbers. We've talked about it a few times already. The other item, which Manager Zakowski is very familiar with, is the front apron and sidewalk repair. It's a mess out there. A lot of it has been exacerbated because of the stormwater problem with the undermining of the road. And if you can believe it, if you look at the fire system patches that are still there, we had wet soil almost back to the doors of the firehouse. That's a problem. So there's a lot of weird stuff going underground. It's got to get reinforced. That's something we're going to have to do. We might be able to push to 2021 or 2022, but we have to see. And there's got to be some close coordination with the staff and with Mr. Marcini, his folks, how best to deal with that. There's utilities, there's a lot going on there. And then finally, planning process for replacement engine 15.1. That's a 1999 unit, and I'll explain to you why it's only going to cost about $350,000 versus almost $750,000 in a second here. This is the slide for Finance Director Bill White. He's been asking for this. We now have completed. Thank you to the Chief's office in particular, Deputy Chief McGuire, for getting this put together. This just gives you a future outlook on what we're thinking with apparatus. The two things that are significant in this plan, I don't want you to panic with the number, about $4.3 million with all our equipment. There's two significant things going on here. The rescue unit that we currently have, the plan is that will be completely removed from the fleet in 2021. The existing squad unit on this line right above and the rescue are going to get combined into one unit, about $850,000. In conjunction with that, 15.1, which I just mentioned on the previous slide, that is going to be replaced with essentially, it's called a TAC unit, it's a mini pump. It's basically an F550 type unit, smaller pump on it. So this is something that's been talked about for a few years. It's about half the cost of what a full-size engine would be. So right there between the elimination rescue 15, doing a mini pump versus a full-size Class A engine is going to save about $1 million over the lifespan of this cap replacement plan. So again, we're going to continue to update this and modify this just as a document that we want the staff to be on board with, to understand why the numbers are the way they are and understand our logic behind some of the operational capabilities we're looking to maintain and delivering services in the community. But we talk about the staff a lot, but the rolling stock, and this was mentioned earlier, there's costs there that has to be factored in. This is the other big part of our overall plan. Three main ways we fund these things. I have down at the bottom municipal support that was talked about for years. Radnor would just, and I remember how it was because I was here for that period before we had the transition. It was, hey, we have fire truck and here it is, 100% paid. And then we transitioned to doing 200 year over year. We put that in escrow fund, and then we draw down on that when we go to do a purchase of apparatus. We use Relief Association dollars as well, and we also use company funds depending on the unit. The one thing I don't have on here, but we've done two ways. We did some financing with Engine 15 through Pierce, the manufacturer. The other thing we did with our ladder truck, which is called Quint 15, we took advantage of a PEMA loan, which you can borrow up to, at the time, was $150,000, 2% loan interest through the state. So the cost of that truck we bought is at $825,000, so it helps. It was, we're trying to do creative things to make it work, so not just outlaying all this cash right once to pay for it.
I guess there's no such thing as a lease market for fire trucks, is there?
There is. There's some pros and cons to it. I mean, we can talk offline more about it. There is.
Just to put it out there, one of the biggest challenges that we overcome when it comes to apparatus is the physical characteristics of the township. We have low bridges, we have tight roads, that a standard off-the-line truck that you could buy for a little bit less will not fit. Steep driveways, pillars at the end of driveways, all that kind of stuff. So our plan, most of the time we have to get a almost fully custom truck to be able to accommodate that. Our goal with getting this mini TAC and getting a smaller truck that can fit into some of these places at a reduced price, it kind of goes in line with our operational plan. It just also happened to work out with our budget this time too. But it's very tough to find something off the line, lease just a generic truck that would work in this town the way we need it to.
So could you speak a little bit about what Bob had actually advanced, because we're not setting the budget today. I'm pretty confident that the numbers that you're showing us are fairly consistent with what you showed us before. What I would be interested in knowing more about, though, is Bob's proposal is how are we going to fund the fire company as opposed to how much, and his plan was a dedicated fire levy. Is that something that the fire company would be interested in, and if not, or if so, what can we do to help?
I can talk about that now. I was actually going to address that at the end. Do you want me to do it now?
So
It's up to you.
I would be grateful just because I've got childcare issues, and I think
Okay, all right, that's fine.
for too long.
Yeah, so I guess the folks in the audience for Radnor and the folks from Bryn Mawr, we've obviously had a lot of conversations with staff over the years. I've had many conversations with Bob. Sometimes I think he wants me here, sometimes he doesn't. Doesn't matter, I'm still coming. And we've talked about this issue. I think ultimately, a tax or a fee, you really aren't going to get around this. Obviously, there's a hesitation from a political standpoint. Let's just put it out there. People hear tax and their hair stands up on their back and they start getting defensive. I totally get it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason that this hasn't happened sooner is because you have not just these folks, a lot of other folks that are volunteers are providing the bulk of the service. So you've avoided it or quote unquote pushed it off. The need for increased staffing is really driving a lot of what we're talking about. So a tax or a fee is what needs to happen. Yes, it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable for me. It's uncomfortable for leaders to come into this every year. Not in a negative way, you're trying to justify yourself what we do. It can get very frustrating and wear you down. From a control and accountability standpoint, nobody's a problem with that, because this is another thing that comes up. Not just here in other places that I'm involved with, either directly or indirectly. Our recommendation, what we think would make sense, is you basically stand up a fire EMS commission. Similar to how you guys have a health services board and things of that nature, you stand up a fire EMS commission, you incorporate service providers, fire chiefs from each of the entities, presidents, administrative director, community members, however you all feel it makes sense and is appropriate. And that essentially is they meet quarterly, and that is the clearinghouse or the maintenance of the money. And that's where they're doing, hey, I'm coming in, I'm doing this with that group, we're going through it, it's collaborative with the fire companies, and that's a check and balance for the board. So by the time it gets to you folks, there's some vetting that's going on with it. So it's not we're doing meeting after meeting after meeting and no one's really taking a look at this really in detail, especially when, as Commissioner Nagel talked about, you could be shelling out $1 million or more in addition to what you're doing now. So, other places do this, but that would be I think from our, the fire company end, and certainly, the Bryn Mawr folks, Chief, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think that
Well,
Thanks, Eamon.
But I'd say you just have it. You stand up whatever you want to call fire EMS commission, and it's got representation. That's how you're managing the money. It's people's money. That's ultimately who it is, and that should be protected absolutely. And the fire company wants to be part of that from a transparency end, and also doing the right thing by the community, which we do that already. But we have no problem doing whatever is necessary to make people comfortable with that process.
If this were to be by ballot initiative instead of by board vote, is that something that the fire company could participate in?
Yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, the majority of our members live in Radnor Township. A lot of folks, they pay taxes themselves. If they're young folks, they will be paying tax at some point. I guess, again, getting back to the political aspect of this, the fire company is going to hide in the corner and say, we want to do a fire tax or a fee and hide. And ultimately, it's really the fire EMS folks and the commissioner standing shoulder to shoulder and saying, hey, this is what needs to happen. Because it doesn't work then. It looks clumsy, it doesn't look coordinated, and well thought out if you guys are out there taking the abuse and we're kind of standing in the shadows. I think most people are realistic in this community. I think people understand that they want fire EMS protection. I think a lot of people, when they get some of the information we talk about in meetings, and mostly we come across, 99% of those people are like, oh God, I didn't realize that we had so many volunteers that are still doing this. Imagine we didn't have these folks. So to answer your question, Clark, we would do whatever's necessary from a public education standpoint, but also I want to emphasize we're not giving up on volunteerism, because ultimately we want that to be a part of how we do things, but we're also in the same, so we're realistic. Volunteers can only do so much. Volunteers need to work a full-time job, they need to raise a family, we need to be respectful of that. We also need to ensure the community is properly protected, and that's that that careful balance that we need to strike.
Because you said a few times there's a political aspect to this. If it's done by ballot initiative, there's really not from our perspective. Because it's just, we're deferring to the voters, we're going to do whatever you say. I agree with you. I think it's very unlikely that the voters are going to say we're going to choose not to fund the fire company. That seems sort of silly, but it does require a public education campaign, and while we all have newsletters and contacts in the community, and we would work on that if that's the direction we ended up going, in order to make this happen, the fire company would have to participate in that, which, I mean, you show up at most of the events anyway. You're in the parades. I mean, Santa rides around in a fire truck. It doesn't require a whole lot of additional work, but it's something we would all have to participate in together.
Would that be a fee or would that be a tax?
A fee. That's,
If you do a fee, then you can get the nonprofits.
Well, so if it's a fee, then we get to nonprofits. If it's a tax, then we don't, I'm sorry, if it's a fee, then we get to nonprofits, but we can't write it off of our taxes.
Very few people
I don't
would be
think we
able
need
to
to
write it
discuss
off.
that tonight.
No, I mean, it's important if
Well,
this
I
is a direction
yeah,
of the board.
Yeah, respectfully, I would just say, we would kindly defer to you all as the experts,
Yeah,
especially
I'm
Bob and
asking Bill,
and what
actually.
they would think makes the most sense.
Well, the significant hurdle I think you'll hear from the legal folks on establishing a fee is, what are you basing the fee on? Because typically a fee is based on some sort of utility or use, and that's going to be difficult to do with a safety. So that's, I mean, generally that's why governments end up having the tax, because it's the last option available. So I'm not going to put a lawyer hat on, but I think that's going to be the big hurdle there. And in most cases, that's why you find that these are levies or some sort of real estate tax.
So
And I don't know if there's a dedicated tax, and again, this is what if, but maybe that puts a little bit more pressure on some of our our exempt folks to contribute. Maybe not, but if it's a dedicated millage that everyone's paying and going directly to a sinking fund that has the controls that Eamon discussed about a separate committee that's providing some oversight, it might get a little bit more traction.
Sure. So then my follow-up on that
Before you
is,
count on it, but-
that would be Radnor's responsibility if either it's a levy or it's something that we vote on. What would be expected, and sorry, this is probably not you, but also you as well, and the other chiefs, what would be expected from other townships? So we're going to go out on a limb, we're going to earmark money, we're putting our best face and our foot out there. What would you guys, or what would we, or all the stakeholders here expect from the other stakeholders of the fire?
I don't think that any other township would be involved.
Well,
How could you go to Lomer and ask them for
No,
money?
you can't. No, you can't, and that's
They think they're paying too much already.
that's the problem. That's the problem.
But I think also,
I mean, yeah, that's exactly my point. They're gonna,
No matter how many times I show them the map.
well, they're gonna say, hey, well, they're committed. Radnor's committed to it. Why don't we pull out? I'm just looking
Yeah,
for
so
our own.
the one good example of this, where we good municipal cooperation going on right now, that this particular issue is getting worked on, is between Fairfield Township and Easttown Township. This has been a long process. It's picked up speed in the last few years, talking about this very issue. I think ultimately, as was stated a few seconds ago, I think, ultimately Radnor's got to do what Radnor's got to do, but there needs to be some type of communication for Radnor's end. We cover part of Tredyffrin. From Bryn Mawr has part of Lower Merion. Bryn Mawr's got a little piece. They're primarily Marple Township, so there does need to be, from an administrative standpoint, the staff and commissioners, to an extent, some intercommunication with each other, because you don't want to have a situation where one municipality is subsidizing services in another township. That you want to avoid, especially if there's a dramatic disparity. But I know just in my experience, that's something we're actively working on in a positive way with Tredyffrin Easttown through my role at Berwyn, and partly also through Radnor, because Radnor provides service on the TRIF end with a few other service providers. So I mean, that, not to steal the staff's thunder, but I think if we get further down that road, certainly I think that'd be a logical thing that should happen. And no one's attacking each other, say, hey, you know, this is what we got going on, and let's make sure we're equally putting into this thing.
Just real quickly on that, there's two questions that really have to get answered before we start diving in. Is first of all, is it going to be funded? And is fire service going to be funded? And I think if everyone accepts that the answer to that is yes, then the next question is how. If we're talking about a levy at the moment, but absent a levy, if the answer to is it going to be funded is still yes, we're using tax dollars now to fund it. It's just under a different mechanism. So the nitty gritty of mutual aid and coverage should be something that we're all very well versed on and looking at anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, I obviously agree with you. So it's a tax raise no matter how you look at it.
Unless you want to cut within the operations
No,
and services you provide.
no. I mean, it really is a tax increase because you have to fund it. So I would say, this is my opinion from what I've seen and I've expressed to other members of the board that I've spoken to, I would rather just see a flat-out tax increase as opposed to earmarking money, and then I don't want to see some of the same problems. We have two other earmarked funds, stormwater and sewer. Now we'd have one more, correct, that would act in a similar fashion. And now we're fighting this and that. Should we do this? It's a study. We're just handcuffing ourselves, and I think that's a poor use of our time, which is the board's one of the, other than money, the time is a huge resource of the board. So if we're going to fund the stuff, it should just be flat out, in my opinion, a tax increase, and not have to take it to the voters, because if it fails, then that doesn't look good either. So it's kind of my synopsis, not that you need to hear it, but
All right, two more, and then we'll wrap it up. I kept this very general with increased staffing. We've talked about this before. So currently right now, Monday through Friday, I'm not going to get into hours, there's 5 folks all during the day, including myself. On the weekends, there's 4 personnel, daytime, and then weekday and weeknights, there's 2 personnel on duty. Typically, not typically, all the time, there's at least 1 paramedic overnight, and the second spot, it's been a mix, but it's shifted. It's predominantly the second spot's paid as well. So it could be a firefighter EMT or a firefighter paramedic, depending on who's available. Our goal by 2020, 2021, and this hinges a lot of discussion we're going to continue to have with you all, is getting 6 personnel weekday and weekend daytime hours, excluding me, during weekdays, per personnel at night, weekday and weekend night. And the fire chief and his folks are working incorporating staff into certain roles to aid them with command and control, especially during the day. A lot of times, again, those folks are working their regular jobs and may or may not be available, depending on different things. Because if you go back to when I started in 2008, there's been a transition here. These transitions are not easy. I can tell you, with the folks I worked on, they've really put a lot of hard thought into these things about, okay, what do we need to do? How do we need to change? And these aren't always easy discussions. So being a part of that and seeing the guys working on this really hard is a positive thing. So I want you to know that these decisions aren't taken lightly. But serious thought is put into it. Finally, volunteer recruitment or retention. Some of the challenges, and these are outlined in SR6 report. You've heard it before. I mean, need for 2-income household, lack of shift workers, increased training demands, minimal incentives, housing is expensive. We all know that, especially if you're new. Young or newly married, it's difficult. And we talked at some of the just over lack of public understanding. But if you did a survey, a lot of people would already assume taxes pay for everything 100%. We sent an anonymous survey and said, you know, is the fire chief of Radnor Fire Company paid or volunteer? Most people will probably say he's paid, just the way it is. Sometimes people find it hard to believe people still volunteer to do this. And I know I question myself sometimes why I volunteer. I know they do sometimes too, but we love to do it. A few ideas, and this is something, not to pile on here, but I think the township a few times asked, so what could we do to help that isn't going to be a budget buster? One of the things the staff is well aware of, Finance Director White and I talked about it today. Again, you can offer up to a 20% tax credit on property taxes if you so choose. State legislator put that into effect a couple years ago. They cleared the path on that. You know, it's not a game changer. You know, if they included school taxes in that, that's a game changer. That's again something else that's in our SR6 report talks about going back into that. You know, we don't have any IT here in Radnor, so you look at some of those municipalities really have a high tax liability. 20% is pretty substantial. So again, it's not monumental, but it is something. It's something you can do, and I don't want to steal Bill's thunder, but to me it didn't sound like it would be, it's really going to swing the revenues for the township.
Lower Merion presently doesn't.
Okay, great.
They do it at the 20% level.
20%.
The only problem they have is the criteria for the level of going back to volunteers should be changed a little bit because of the time frame the guys take away from work.
Haverford does it as well.
So I hear the sample legislation, right?
Yeah, I actually have Lower Merion's legislation.
Okay, yeah, so, again, it's another tool in the toolbox if you so choose to deploy it to something, let you know it's available to you. The other thing is really minimal costs, implement a service recognition program. You come up with something at the township, I know you do an annual event for volunteers, do something specific to fire EMS for volunteers. If folks hit certain standards or if they complete, firefighter 1 or vehicle rescue technician, or you can craft a program in conjunction with input from the fire chiefs, and appreciation and kind of that positive reinforcement messaging goes a long way. Especially getting that going when folks are new in the fire company, seeing that support from their local officials, that's a big deal. That's something else we could be happy to talk to you about. The other thing that you could consider, do a pay-per-call program. Plymouth Township just implemented this past year. They cover 2 fire companies that provide service in Plymouth from a fire perspective. Plymouth Fire Company, Harmonville Fire Company. Again, it's outlined in the SR6 report. It's something that you can do. You could do, okay, if you run 100 calls for the year, you get $50. Or if you complete certain trainings, you get a certain, it's like a little stipend, so to speak. So what you have to figure out is how much money would you want to put into a program like that, and then conversely, from a township side, if you're looking at putting major money into staffing, well, would you rather put that 25 or 30 into staffing, or you want to do both? So again, I'm not saying something you have to do, but just give you another idea of a neighboring municipality not too far away. Plymouth Township's doing to help kind of encourage volunteers with a modest stipend program for pay per call.
Eamon, we do that presently, and I'm not sold on it.
Lower Merion?
Yeah, no, Bryn Mawr.
Just Bryn Mawr, right? So
okay, and it comes out of our general fund, that money.
Okay.
And right now, I'm trying to implement something different because it worked out well when we first started. It's fallen off just like everything else.
Yeah. And there's another federal program called SAFER, Staffing for Adequate Fire Emergency Response, and they can do a federal ask for that type of program. So that's another way you can help to fund something like that. But there's pros and cons. But again, just put something else out there. I think the tax credit program, the service recognition, those are something that we could get with the staff and get with a couple of commissioners. Maybe we can hammer those out this year if you want to. No pressure, but I think it's good just to give you just a couple ideas you all can think about. And that's all I have for Radnor, unless you have any questions. But I appreciate your time and attention.
Nice job.
Thank you, Eamon.
Eamon, I got one more question for you. On your contributions, you said $293,000. Is there any way to see what the residential and business developments are giving you?
We break it out,
Do
yes.
you? Can you let us know that?
Sure.
Because we're getting terrible out of businesses.
Yeah.
Ours is 90% residential.
As is ours. I think ours
Yeah,
is
ours-
78-22.
Yeah,
or something
Ours
like that.
attract, I mean,
I think the businesses are the ones that have to be hit because they're causing the main problems, the alarms and so forth and so on. Like look around there financial, Mike, you know.
We had
what
5
they-
in the last
Do you
2
split
weeks.
it between EMS and fire as well? Contributions?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the businesses don't, because you ask for donations and they don't give anything either?
Our percentage is probably tracked very close for Bryn Mawr. I mean, realistically, if you go up and down the main line, the business contributions are gonna be about the same. Residential return is gonna be the same.
7%.
If you get a major fire or a major event, you might see spikes in certain neighborhoods where people are more like, oh wow, there's a fire in West Beach Street, these guys did a heck of a job, we gotta support them, they're volunteers. Or say there's a nasty accident, or, you know, Linda does a nice report about something that happened, and getting that awareness out there, people might respond to that and donate to the fire company.
It's tough to do a one-to-one parity because as the business owner, I might give you a contribution individually, but my business doesn't give you that same contribution.
And we have some people that fall into that, absolutely, that live here and they're, you know, in a small business or, you know, work right in financial and they donate separately for, you know, smaller law firms and things like that.
Can you charge homeowners if there's a fire or not? The place burns down?
Yeah, you can do fire billing. It's something that some fire companies choose to do. It's limited. I can tell you based on Radnor's call volume, Radnor's demographics, on the high end, we might be able to do like 30 to 40. But you're making an assumption you're going to have house fires, you're going to have more significant incidences throughout the year. So you're kind of rolling the dice on that. It's something we can certainly do, but going back to something Commissioner Nagel talked about, if you were to do a tax or a fee, you have a couple decisions to make. Do you want to go down the path of fire billing? On the ambulance billing side, if all the residents are putting into that on a higher level, are we balance billing the residents, or are we just take whatever assurance gets us? Are we, if we do a tax or a fee, are we saying, you know what, we're just going to go in-network and accept whatever the payment is, and it erases all the balance billing and all the overhead and call it a day? Whatever that money is, maybe that goes back to the township, as was discussed. It's going to be lower than that number I just showed you for 2018 if we're in that scenario, but those are some of the logistical things that have to get discussed. How best to manage this and also message it to the public, because I can just for me personally, okay, if I'm supporting the fire company, but then I get picked up by the ambulance, I don't care if they're hitting my insurance or my Medicare, but why am I getting another bill, or like what's going on here? Like, I thought we redid this or helped stabilize it. So that needs to be kind of fleshed out a little bit.
When it comes to who doesn't pay your ambulance the most, would it be the senior citizens or more of the college kids?
Well, it really comes
Or
down
is
to
it
what
just
is
the
class,
residents?
what is a billable call. So we could respond to a senior that needs our assistance. They have no way to get to that hospital, but it could be classified as a minor non-emergency event. So we have to contract with the government for Medicare and Medicaid. You can't bill, it's illegal. So you have to contract, so you're getting whatever that is. That's the way it works across the country. The struggle that comes in when you get calls, a lot of times the senior fell and they sprain their ankle or something. Well, you'll get a nurse reviewer that'll sit there in an office that's not here, somewhere else. They shouldn't have gone via ambulance. They don't care about the circumstance or the struggles we have with billing and donations. They don't care. They're just like, they shouldn't have. Non-emergency, refused, and then you have to go back to the person we picked up and try to explain how they can challenge that and send additional documentation and justify why they had to go. And that's a process that's repeated over and over and over again, even though we provide service. We responded out in kind, put them on the stretcher, had to pick them up, they had no way to get to the hospital. And a lot of times we go unpaid, we get zero, or we don't get paid for 2 or 3 months. And as I've talked about in previous meetings, you get a major cash flow problem. So.
2 more questions. Can you bill on false alarms if you deem that it was like, real,
No.
you know, you can't bill on
The,
it.
the state law, it has to be 3 false alarms before you bill it.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
built
we-
from the township.
Yeah,
The township takes care of our
we-
billing.
We
Can
just
we-
checked their
Okay,
fines
can
up.
we raise the fine?
2
Bob,
years
can we
ago.
raise our fines or not?
Oh, you have to-
Can we raise them more or not?
I think they have to be within
I mean,
reason.
if you're
Within
violating
reason.
it 3 times.
Well, yeah, they have to be within reason, you just can't come up with a whole number out of the air that.
The biggest thing from a false alarm perspective, and this is something that I know the senior staff here at the township and also the chief's office are working with Kevin and his group, is really how false alarms, the fining is one part, that's definitely one aspect of it, but the other thing is getting the township, when we have repeat alarms, is you guys are the AHJ, authority having jurisdiction. So you guys going in and providing that remediation or that gentle push, like, hey, you need to get this alarm fixed. The fire company's not coming down here for the 4th or 5th time because you're lazy or whatever the case is. You need to get your alarm fixed, and that'll eliminate those false alarms. So that followed from the township directly to the homeowner, or especially to the business owners. We have a lot of these false alarms, commercial settings. That is the effective component. That's what needs to continue. It's happening now, but I think an increased effort on that front would be helpful to all 3 fire companies that service the township.
I mean, you guys just, you know, you guys do a great job. I did the whole Santa Claus, and I think that would be a great time to have a bucket where you're giving out presents. I know that you guys didn't want to do it, but people can give donations as well. Then finally, I just have one more question. Bill, this is probably going to be more geared toward you.
Okay.
And you may know too, what is grant eligible here? Like a new truck or this, you know, can you get it for personnel? And how do we go ahead and try to grab grants if they are available for first responders? And it may not be fire and EMS, it could be police or others.
So, a couple things. We've, and this is all 3 fire companies. So, you know, Radnor, Bryn Mawr, Broomall, we all apply for the state grant, which we get up to $15,000 max. If they do a calculation, it comes out to like $14,000 and change that we get. And there's certain limitations of what we can spend that money on. If you have an ambulance service, you can apply for an ambulance grant. So in case of Radnor, we just did that. You can apply for, I believe it's up to like $10,000. They give an equation. We end up getting like $7,000 and change. And again, that's limited for what you can spend it on. We take advantage of that every year, each of the fire companies. That number is not going up in as many years as I've been doing it for 20 years. I think it's probably been about the same. I already mentioned the PMLO program. The state did increase those numbers a few years back for how much you can borrow, 2% low interest from the state. You can have 3 concurrent loans running through PEMA in that regard. But I believe there's some facilities items you can do on that as well, but it's limited. We take advantage of this. This is the firefighters grant. We have the SAFER grant we're looking at. We're targeting next year for either volunteer recruitment retention and or something from a staffing perspective. And then you get little one-offs. One thing that State Senator Leach's office was critical in helping us with was a grant through DCED to help to pay for one of our heart monitors, which I think all in the whole project cost around like $36,000. And that was a unique program through the state that we contacted their office. They contacted us, and what do you guys have? We need another monitor at the fire company for the EMS service. So that doesn't happen every year, but we're trying with Representative O'Mara. We still have to get with her and meet with her. We keep in contact with them because sometimes they find about different opportunities that come up at the state level.
And remember, her father was a firefighter.
That's right. So, no, I didn't mean to be long-winded there, but I mean, we do, there are things out there and programs. You know, certainly if the staff sees anything that we aren't seeing, you certainly let us know. Again, even if we get in a situation where we're going to need increased funding, I think everyone gets the point that we're beating a dead horse here. The tax fee, even if we're doing those things, I think from a due diligence standpoint, from a taxpayer standpoint, we still need to be pursuing those monies. From a federal standpoint and a state standpoint, we still need to be going after those because all factors in. It's stupid not to. So we would still continue now. We wouldn't say, okay, oh, we're done now. We got it, and just back off. We still need to be creative. We still need to go the extra mile. Again, doing right by the citizen.
Bill, are there any other grants that you know of? I'm sure.
No, the type of grants that Eamon described are the ones that we're familiar with. We get the same on the police side.
Mm-hmm.
The only ones that really affect personnel, we get some state funds for targeted enforcement on speed and DUI checks, and those are $5,000 to $7,000 a year, and they're helpful to cover those targeted events, but they're certainly not going to balance a budget. And then the only other staffing type of grant that I've seen through the years is more on the federal side, and usually those are only for expanding departments to hire new staff, and they just help you phase in those staff. So as you phase them in, they pay for that, and then the grant falls off, and you have a fully funded staff member to fund after the grant's gone. So those are helpful for growing departments, but you have to be aware financially what is needed on the back end.
You know how they offer a 20% rebate for property taxes? Could we add on maybe our house benefits, health care to some of the firefighters that may not have that? Some of the volunteers. I don't know if it's legal or not.
Well, you guys, the Radnor Fire Company specifically has their own collective bargaining with their own benefit package.
And that goes to the volunteers as well?
No, it's just for the staff.
For the volunteers?
Not excluding management, so I'm not, I'm not, yeah, I'm not neither.
All right, but that may entice people as well if we could offer our health care. I don't know if we can, but to some volunteers.
We talked in years past through Divot and looking to try to, we're such a small group at this point. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, it might be worth having a discussion. We did it with the library. I mean, we're not offering library staff the township's plan, but they were able to fit their plan in the Divot offering, or Divot was able to take their plan and go sell it on the market and get some better rates. So that may be a possibility. And that's definitely something we can talk about. And I mean, all we're doing is getting some economies of scale there. We're not changing the plan.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So next steps. I mean, I don't know. You've got almost a full board sitting here. Is there anyone that objects at least to the idea? I mean, some of the things are take some research and we'll have to talk about it. But is there anyone who objects to the idea of at least working on the service recognition program?
No.
And I mean, that seems like something easy and simple, and we could get that going in some way. And I don't know, do we combine it with the police, or I don't know.
For recruitment and retention, what we have found most successful is housing. We've done pretty well. We bought a house with 3 young guys in it. They come and go. Gladwin has everything. They have
guys in the fire.
There's like 11 people there.
They have a lot of housing, subsidized housing, so that the volunteers, 1, get that benefit, and 2, they're really right there at the firehouse when there's a call, especially at night.
We'll come up with a proposal on that. We'll work with Amy. Look at a
So that would be
proposal
the
for
next-
that with housing possibly.
All right, so next steps, possibly something around housing. Would we look at the tax credit program?
In my opinion, I definitely think that's something worthwhile. If you take our average tax bill for just the township piece of the tax, a 20% credit would be about $300, I'm rounding. So that might be meaningful to a household and get someone off the fence and have them volunteer if they're considering it. But I think if you had 10 houses do that, it's not going to have a significant impact on our revenue. So it's definitely something worth considering.
Do we want to give Radnor an opportunity, or do you have a presentation?
I think it's been pretty well covered. We'd be more than happy to aid and as you're trying to decide what to do, give our input. When it comes time to go campaign on a tax increase in Radnor Township, I think I would be hesitant to do that as Radnor, because really we are in Lower Merion.
Yeah.
And I think
Like
we
I said,
might-
I can hear Scott all
Yeah, as I say, we might hear about that a little bit, but we're happy to offer whatever input we can to be helpful.
Could we maybe ask John Rice for his feedback on what we would need to see and do and what the deadlines are if we were to pursue a ballot initiative? And what our options are by way of fee or tax? I imagine we could do something with a fee where we called it a public building, but it wouldn't cover the whole thing.
Yeah.
Might end up getting more complicated.
Eamon, how many of your members fall into the renter category rather than homeowner? Do you have any idea?
I'd have to look at the demographics, but I mean, out of the active crew,
Low.
I mean, it's probably less than 15% out of the active volunteer fire EMS providers.
Most of the people that don't have permanent housing in town are students.
Yeah.
And the turnover rate we have with them, it's unfortunate they put a lot of time in, but just about the time they are, kind of independently useful,
Yeah.
they're out of school and can't afford to stay here. And they're
Especially with the training requirements these days.
I think if I could suggest maybe asking the board if the board supports funding the fire companies at this point, and then direct the administration to work with the fire companies to what their 10-year plans are for funding and that, so that we can come back to you and say, this is kind of what, now starting to dig into the next layer, that next tier of detail.
Yes.
Fine with that, or-
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Jake?
Bob knows where I stand on this issue.
All right. So we've got the other ancillary things, so the tax credit idea, that could be moved forward, maybe quicker, service recognition, and housing.
One other suggestion I'll make, and I apologize to the board for doing this, until we switch your cable over to Bill's.
Yeah.
I think this addresses
Thank you.
those who would be exempt from that if there was a levy that goes to the real estate taxes. This was an item that we had previously discussed, that was laid out.
Florida.
This was a voluntary contribution program that we pitched to the university, the 3 universities, Eastern, Cabrini, and Villanova.
Yeah, Valley Forge may not be here.
Valley Forge pays they do pay a pilot. American College pays a pilot. So there'd be the 3 institutions that do not contribute. We had pitched this based on the date that you see up there was 2014.
Well, we pitched it in 12.
Or 12,
With
sorry.
an effective date of 14.
So it showed a phase-in, and these funds were specifically to be set aside for fire companies, police, and public works, so that it's services that directly impact them, the university. So it's not like it goes to the general fund, so we can use it for any other programs. These are services that directly impact them. And it shows what those type of revenues would look like from those institutions.
Can we bill them or not, or we need something?
No, this is something they would have to voluntarily agree to. But I think if this is something that would be considered, that if the township's looking to put a levy on, that this is a plan that says this is because they won't be contributing, but they'll be taking advantage of these services that
Sure.
I don't know how you, so then you call it a
they
fee,
don't contribute towards.
but then you have to call it a fee.
No, well, that would be, this would be.
We need authorization
But then I don't know how you-
municipalities, utilities out.
Pilot by any other name.
So this
Yes,
says
call it-
February 2012, so you came up with this back in February of 2012?
Yes, we pitched it.
And you pitched it, who'd you pitch it to?
Universities,
And what did they say?
they're charities.
We said no
They're
thank you.
They said, come on.
nonprofits.
They call themselves charities. But we'll say that there's a different component of this that probably offline would probably be best to describe what happened.
All right.
Can I guess?
All right, so just to circle back and kind of wrap all this up, I think we have some direction on some of these, on some items. You guys will bring some things forward for the board to consider. Do we have, I don't want to put you under the gun here, Bill, like, of course, you know, a timeline? Do we wanna, I mean, we definitely wanna, I think, also talk to John. Do we wanna talk to John about the ballot initiative and see what?
Yes.
And if you would like, at the next special meeting, we could reserve a spot after the Capitol. So we could come right back with this in a month.
Anything else?
Public comment.
I will do public comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just one observation, and I think it's something that should be part of this discussion we have subsequently, is to assign a level of service that is desired by the township that we are to provide. We've been trying to guess as a board of directors of a fire company what level of service you should be entitled to, but it's something that really should be coming from your people to us as to exactly what you want in the way of staffing. Do you want to have an ambulance available all the time, or do you want to have one, just a single ambulance that could be tied up pretty much all day and have to require assistance from other companies, for instance? How many firemen do you need on a fire truck, qualified firemen would you like to have on a fire truck during the day or whatever time period? Those are questions that we're wrestling with, and we really shouldn't have to be doing that. It's not, it's a nice job for us, but it's something we're qualified to do, but it's not necessarily our job to be doing that. We need to be best to know what is needed.
That's going to really impact funding now.
Yeah.
Certainly would.
It makes a big difference in the funding.
It'll be a direct hit for everybody.
So there, I mean, Bob, is that a level of, you know, technicality that we're gonna, I mean, if my house is on fire, shouldn't come put it out. You know, I mean, for me, and if you need like 5 guys, great.
I
If
think you
need
gotta
2
leave that
guys,
to us.
great.
I think that's gotta be left to us.
That's
We're
what
the
I'm
ones that
thinking.
handle right now. If we came to Bob and said, I want 6 guys during the day, Bob said, I can't fund it. What do I do? It's a service we provide. If we send out 4 guys, and Joe sends out 6, we're doing what we have to do with what we have.
And I think just like you said earlier, their expertise has to be part of this, but also too is we want to be proactive on this and not be too reactive to wait until something happens and then all of a sudden you're throwing money at something that you don't have the ability to control or manage. I think their expertise, they've been through this, they know where the trends are going nationally at the state and even at the local level. That's something I think in partnership here.
And we know our personnel too. We know it's Saturday at 10 o'clock, I can get 15 guys. At Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, I can get 4.
Absolutely.
Sounds like we need the fires to plan for times when.
Well, and fires are down also. That's part of our problem. The volunteers aren't coming out because we don't have fires. We have fire alarms, but we have fires.
And I think too, maybe I'll cross the line here, but I'm looking at if I'm going next to a volunteer or I'm volunteering and there's somebody that's worth me getting paid, it gets harder for me each time to say, well, these guys are getting paid. You know, why am I going to drag myself or put my job at risk? It's hard when you have side by side and watching the departments both work in situations. It's absolutely incredible to watch. I think you want to be on the front side of this and not where you're trailing or within their own departments they have issues between who's volunteering, who's full-time, and what level that they're being put into. Because they're risking their life just as much as that full-time person.
Bob says a good point. I'll tell you, the chief of Kenwood is a self-employed electrician, okay? And he says he doesn't go to 90% of the calls during the day because they're only 7 minutes. By the time he gets out in his truck, packs his tools up, gets to the firehouse, the trucks are back. 7 minutes, he says, it takes them to handle a call. So why would guys leave their employers?
The only other thing I would just add on to that, some of these meetings run together in my head. So the one meeting we talked about service level, so we talked about 1720 and 1710. You can argue both ways how you want to do it, but I think the most unbiased, unemotional way to do it is look at both of those standards. The 1720 is more relevant for what we're doing because we still have a volunteer component involved with all 3 fire companies, and keying off of that, factoring AHA and other health resources as far as EMS response, DOH guidelines. So I think that's where we're going to derive a lot of the service level. or we should. I mean, we can't really, there's certain anecdotal things we can bring up as far as the chief pointed out, one responses are better than others. But we really want to pick a standard and then see what makes sense, what fits best. Maybe for the middle of Wayne, it's this, and the area's more spread out, it's a little bit different. As far as the urban, rural, suburban is how NFPA breaks it up as far as population density. So I think that should absolutely, as we continue to have this dialogue, that needs to be factored in, and that'll help, I think.
Well, so do we feel like we have heard what we need to hear and provided direction? Do you, Bob and Bill, feel like you have some good direction on?
Yeah. We talked about when you would like to see some of this back.
I didn't answer that.
No, something else popped up there. Well, when? Summer? I mean, earlier the better.
Yeah, I mean, some of these things do we first need to find out, I think, if we wanted, what we would need to drive for if we're gonna do some sort of, go out for referendum around a tax or a levy or something like that. So maybe first find out what that might look like, what the timeline looks like, and then,
Well, I think on those issues, as well as the providing the board with detail on 20% real estate tax credit, service increment, or housing, and even consideration of anything with the false alarm fee. I mean, that could be turned around pretty quick within a month or so. I was thinking a little bit longer term to nail down the numbers on the long-term outlooks. We'll probably need more than a month to figure that out. But
we need that information if you're going to have a ballot question.
yeah, we need to be able to make the case.
Why don't, if you're all right, why don't we target next month after the capital plan? That we give an update of where we're at, and then this way we'll work with both companies to see. Because I think we probably have a lot of that already together, so.
If you're going to form a committee about the 20%, I'd gladly sit on that. For the criteria for a volunteer to get the abatement.
Bob, I do want to be careful, and one of the concerns I had with the structure of doing a single topic every time is, every time somebody presents, I'm cautious that the board's going to say, oh, that's a good idea, we need to fund that, and then at the end of the sessions, we've got 10 programs we want to fund, and we're back in that same thing. I mean, we should really be focusing on our priorities, realizing that we might not be able to fund everything this year. So moving forward too fast on some of these is something we need to think about.
Yep. I mean, from our perspective, I think what we're doing is just stacking the blocks. And next month, for example, we're going to talk about capital. We might find as we go along that some of these discussions are linked in one way or another, where funding, if we provide funding on one item, it might free up funding for one of the other priorities that are being discussed. So hopefully as we go through the year, that will become clearer. But that's a good point, Ed.
Also for the
unless you want to say yes to everything.
For the capital discussions, I think it would be beneficial, since most of the board is new, to get them the CARFAC presentation on what their recommendations were.
In advance to look over?
Yeah.
Okay. Can definitely do that.
And maybe we could have Mike come in and present it. No, Mike.
Jerry?
No.
Well, I mean,
When?
from my perspective, we can
Mark,
certainly,
not Mike.
we can certainly identify all these things, but until we know, I think, how could we couldn't even address any of these because we didn't know. We'd never delved down deep enough to understand or know or answer any of these questions, because all of this was happening in such a short amount of time leading into, we got to decide on a budget. So, Jake, to your point, I don't think, we can't say we're going to fund everything, but at least we have identified some things we're going to look into. Maybe there's things that we prioritize and move in different ways over the next couple of years. But then there are some low-hanging fruit that maybe we didn't identify before, and we can pick that off and address it without it having any sort of serious impact. So, I think these are helpful. All right, so y'all are good with your direction? Everyone's good? Any other public comment? Yes, Sarah.
As a senior citizen living in Radnor Township, and I've now been here for 37 years, there are two services that the township provides which keeps me safe. One is fire and ambulance, and the other is the police. And if there needs to be rebalancing, I see some of the other special services may have to go by, because how can we live without fire and ambulance and police? And I hate to think what my home insurance policy would go to if my township didn't provide police and fire and ambulance. And I think that needs to be pointed out in education.
Oh, absolutely.
That it may be unbalanced. I certainly don't need another levy, fee, or tax, but I can't in my life live here if I don't have fire, ambulance, and police.
I said we have numbers.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other public comment? All right, well, thank you all very much, first of all, for being here this evening, for waiting for us. We apologize for being late, and for all that you do for our communities, Radnor, Bryn Mawr, Broomall, I'm sorry, Bill.
Could I indulge just 2 more minutes?
Sure.
I know everyone wants to get out of here.
He prepared
Oh my
slides.
gosh,
and
it's
he
got
wants
another
to show.
slide, I'm
No,
sorry.
it's not a slide.
What
This
is
is
it?
our
Oh, it's our township website.
this is our open finance program.
Oh, wow, all right.
So we launched this last month. It's a link right off the township's website. So when you go to it, and I thought this would be helpful because we talked about fire funding. So if you're curious, you've got this panel here on expense budget. You want to explore it, and speaking of the devil, and you're curious on how much the township spends on fire funding. This is where people might get lost, because some of these might not be direct or obvious, but protections to persons and property is where we fund fire. And when you click on that, it's going to tell you the different areas of our budget that go towards that function. And you keep drilling down, and you can see all of the different things that we're spending money on. You can break it down by year. The budget amount is the light bar, where the dark bar is how much was actually funded. And again, you can see all of the money that the township is paying by company. The non-divisional, the $140,000, that's how much we're paying Aqua for the hydrant water. So again, it just seemed appropriate for the discussion we had tonight. If anyone's watching this tape, the thousands that I'm sure will tune in, you can jump on the open finance, and if you're curious on how much we're spending on fire, it's all right there off the township's website. So thank you for the 2 minutes.
I think we need to
to
make a
plug that.
video of you, Bill, of running through this.
Someone much better spoken and better looking.
He just wanted to show off how snazzy.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
It seemed
It is.
on time.
All right,
thank you.
anything else for this evening? All right, thank you all, and
Move to
move
adjourn.
to adjourn. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye.